Now, Mary's gone, it says, and Elizabeth's full time came that she should be delivered. So it's her time now to give birth. And it says she brought forth a son. It's powerful how God can bring something in real time, which can showcase this point, the stuff you're talking about, very powerfully. What do I mean, Israel? Well, what do you mean, Israel? Let me explain, right? So when we got to this verse, I was going to talk about how it's powerful how you have to think about what it would be like in that period in time. It's hard for us to fathom and understand to a certain degree what life was like 2,000 years ago, because we can read the Gospels and get information, but it doesn't give us all of the groundwork. I remember I've read some books about the first century, and it opens my eyes even wider, like, wow, this was going on, this was going on. It helps you understand the Gospels even greater. But think about this, right? Today, I know like someone, I know someone who had a son today. And as I thought about this today, I was like, you know what? This really helps us understand the point I want to make with this particular verse. Because when it says in verse 57, it was her time to give birth and she brought forth a son, it's easy for us to just overlook this. But there's something so powerful hidden in this verse, if you've been paying attention from earlier on in the gospel. Now we're in verse 57. So there's 56 verses which have come previously. I think back to the people I know today who had a son. Why is it powerful? Because they knew they were having a son months in advance. Just like Elizabeth and her husband, Zachariah, knew from the angel Gabriel that she was going to have a son. The people I know today who had a son, literally today, had a son, they knew as well. But what was the difference? The difference was 2,000 years. And the powerful thing we have today, one of the powerful things we have today is technology, which helps us see in advance, this is going to be a son. And it's highly accurate. But you know the powerful thing about the accuracy of that, of those tests, right? The sonographs. The powerful thing about that is God's word is more powerful. But notice this. For any of us who had children, right? How much, I've never done this, right? We've got 5 children, but we've never done this. We've never found out ahead of time what the baby is going to be, the sex. But I know many people who do that. That's the common thing that most people do, right? How often, for those of you who have had children or know people who have had children who have had a sonograph and the doctor has said, you are going to have a son or you are going to have a daughter, how much trust do people put in that? A lot of trust, right? And they say it's like 99 point something accuracy. It's not, they can't say it's completely accurate because, you know, certain times it doesn't deliver. But most people today put the utmost confidence in that. Why is this significant? Because as this happened today, I started thinking to myself, like, you know what? It's interesting that I was going to talk today about how God gave Zachariah a word from the angel Gabriel that you will have a son, but they didn't have any sonograph. They didn't have sonography, right, in that period in time. So all they were trusting on was not a bit of gel, right, that was rolled on Elizabeth's belly, and they could see the baby kicking inside the belly. All they were holding on to for that period in time was the truth of God's word. Now, the reason I asked you to think about how much people put their trust in sonographers, right, in that test, they put trust in it like it's a sure thing. That is the kind of faith we know even more, because I said it's 100% accurate. That is, we need to put even more faith in God's truth, in the truth of God's word, because they didn't have any test which said that could show them, yes, this is going to be a boy. All they had was a word from God. They had God's truth. And this, months and months later, as this passage says, has now come to pass. Imagine how they would have thought in that moment when they realized it's a son. Wow. That visitation that Zechariah had in the temple on that once in a lifetime opportunity for a priest to offer the incense, it was true. It was genuine. It was from God. When Elizabeth sees the baby and realizes, oh, it was a son. Zechariah, that vision you had, it was true. They have now taken full ownership at this point of the truth of God's word. You see, the enemy doesn't want you to take God's word and believe in it and trust in it and be patient with it and allow it to produce fruit. But this is a powerful example of this, of God's word coming to pass. And because God is all-knowing, because God doesn't lie, and because God cannot lie, whenever he says something, as I mentioned previously, God's word, as it says in Isaiah, does not return to him void. It prospers. It prospers, and it only prospers. It can only prosper. So when we read God's word and we look at things in God's word which are clearly applicable for us, let's take even more confidence than we do when we're having our babies and we're looking and saying, okay, what's the sex? And we're putting complete or very much trust in it. Let's trust God's word more, because they had God's word and now it had become a realization. The moment you begin trusting in God's word and allowing the fruit of God's word to produce, the seed of God's word to produce fruit in your life, you will begin to trust God's word even more. I'm telling you. I'm speaking from personal experience, but I want you to experience that for yourself. Because when you start realizing that for yourself, it's like what I'm talking about with the 4 tiers of the cake. When you've just been reading on a literal level, it's hard to understand, wait, there's practical stuff in this stuff, even though this is about Mary, and this is about Elizabeth, and this is about John the Baptist, of course. But you have to go deeper. You have to eat more of the cake. You have to enjoy it and look for it. There's all this type stuff, yeah, like I talked about the type in the last session. There's types in here that once you see them, you cannot unsee them. There's deep personal stuff. For me, for example, the person I know who had a son today, how it personally links into today's session. Why is it so powerful that the son came today? And it drives home the point I'm making even more. These are the kind of things which, the more and more they happen to you, the more and more you realize, like, I can't just keep chalking these up to coincidences. Elizabeth's full time came and she should be delivered, and she brought forth a son. Now, she's elderly, she's old, and what does tradition say? We're getting into it. Truth versus tradition. Don't let traditions stop truth from bringing your triumph. Don't let your traditions stop the truth from bringing your triumph. Imagine if Elizabeth said, well, tradition says that once you get to a certain age, it's done. No more children. But just like God's word is more powerful and is more accurate than the sonograph, God's truth is more powerful than any tradition. This is why in Genesis, for example, when a very similar situation happened with Abraham and his wife, Sarah, their bodies were old and decrepit and tired and finished. But God said, no, this tradition, no matter how often it happens, is not more powerful than my truth. Abraham, Sarah, you will have a son in your old age. It's the same God that said this to Elizabeth and to Zechariah. You may be old, it may be past the time, traditionally speaking, but my truth, God says, triumphs over the tradition. Elizabeth believes it. What do you think will happen for us as Christians when we start believing more in God's truth than the traditions which are all around us? Those areas where God's truth is speaking in your life will begin to flourish. because they can only flourish. This is why it's important for us to understand God's word.